Good morning, everyone. My name is Nicole Augustine. I am the PFS Grant Cultural Liaison, and I do apologize that I could not be there with you this morning, but I'm grateful for technology and the ability to join you virtually. So, PFS, if you haven't heard of it, it is the Partnership for Success grant that was awarded here in North Carolina to help us address the prescription medication misuse problem that's happening across our state. So, Gaston County was one of 13 counties that received this grant. A part of this grant allows money set aside to provide cultural competency training, and that's where I come into all of this. So I'm here to give just a short presentation to talk to you about one, what is cultural competency and why should we care? Why is the training important? I'll give you a little bit of a teaser of the types of conversations I have in a training dealing with the cultural influences on substance use, culture and how it influences the language that we're using. And just to remind you that these services are currently free to you through September 30th as a part of this grant. So let's start with just a conversation about what cultural competency is. I'm sure this is a term that many of you have heard many times over, right? But essentially, cultural competency really looks at our ability to interact effectively with people from different cultures, right? And so what do we mean by interact effectively? And when we break that part down, we're really looking at the ability to be respectful and responsive. And this is despite varying differences in health beliefs and practices. And as folks who are healthcare providers, this is something that you're constantly navigating. As you interact with your patients, they come with their own set of preconceived, health beliefs and behaviors, and you're negotiating those and their culture with what advice that you're providing. So cultural competency is very near and dear to the work you do just as much as it is to us who are in prevention and substance misuse prevention work. The key thing to think about with cultural competency is culture and truly understanding what this word means and recognizing that this word is much, much broader than a lot of times what people think, which is just primarily things like race and ethnicity, right? But culture includes gender, geographic location, socioeconomic status, religion. There are a whole host of characteristics that affect a person's culture. In substance use prevention, we are really looking at how an individual's culture influences their substance use. And so one of the conversations that I have in my training is to get people to take a moment and think about what their family's cultural approach is to substance use. And even now, I ask you to take a moment and just reflect back when you were a child. What messages did you receive or maybe not receive from your parents as it relates to using alcohol, marijuana, tobacco, prescription medications, any illicit drugs? Because what we find is that culture begins very, very young, right? Your family, that initial family unit, are who help develop your sense of culture, which includes your perceptions about substance use. So part of what I like to do in the training is to have a conversation about that. Then I also like to think about how culture influences language, because one of the things we start to see is the language that we use influences our ability to reach our audience. So one of the things you may have noticed or not noticed is that every time I've talked about substance use, I say use or misuse. I don't use words like abuse, addict. We have a lot of words that are so negative and conjure up a lot of negative thoughts. And so another thing I talk about in my training is thinking about words and the stigma that words place on people that prevention messages from being received. So take a minute and think of the word abuse. And as you hear that word, think about what comes to mind. As a healthcare provider, as a community member, when you think of the word abuse, what do you picture and what do you imagine? A lot of times, especially when you're talking to youth or community persons, they picture the extreme. They picture someone who's potentially losing their job, not getting much work done, not take care of themselves. And the reality is, abuse doesn't always look that way. So what happens is a lot of times we're coming into communities trying to get people to create change. We're using words like abuse and they're like, oh, you're not talking to me, right? And the reality is we are, because right? People don't just wake up at the place of addiction. It happens over time. And so part of what I do in the training too is having this conversation about shifting our language to words like misuse, harmful use, substance use disorder. And as healthcare providers, you can think about this same thing, right? Some of you may be even doing screenings where you're trying to assess how much a patient is utilizing prescription medications, alcohol, tobacco. If you're using some negative language, your patients may automatically be denying or saying they don't use. But if that language is changed, right, you potentially open up for better dialogue. So this is one of the conversations I have in my training. On the tail end of the training, we really start to take it externally and thinking about how does our community culture influence our substance use practices. Because one of the things that I have found is that substance use varies dramatically from place to place. How it looks in rural communities is different from how it looks in suburban or even urban communities. And it's important to understand the context and the environment under which substance use occurs so that we can do a better job with our prevention messages and our prevention strategies. Now, the very last part of the training focuses on putting things into action. I call it the implementation brainstorm, where we take time to think about what is the work you're already attempting to do in the community to create change. And based upon the training we've just received, are there modifications or adjustments that we might need to make to address the cultural influence, right, on those particular activities? So the trainings that I'm able to provide can vary in length of time from as short to an hour to 2 hours, but really giving us an opportunity to, one, start with defining and investigating cultural competency, and then ending with developing an action plan on how to work in the community and do things differently, but also be conscious of culture. So I hope that this short presentation gave you a better sense of the service that I'm able to offer you. Again, my name is Nicole Augustine. It was a pleasure bringing this information to you today. I hope to hear from you. I have left cards. Please feel free to take them and contact me at your earliest convenience. Have a great day.